Hi again, you guys, for our next installment of our World War One lecture. This is lecture 2. So this is going to be how the U.S. responds to this war that is in Europe and how we enter into the fray. Again, we don't start the war. We're just going to come and finish it. America. But this is sort of the lecture how we get to that spot of actually fighting in this war. Because originally we want to stay out and stay isolated and stay in our Western hemisphere. It's a European, Eastern hemisphere problem. The Monroe Doctrine is splitting us in the world in half. It shouldn't be our issue. Well, how does it come to be our issue to the point where we're going to send hundreds of thousands of men to go fight and tens of thousands of Americans to die in Europe and around the world in World War I? So let's get to that today and grab your notes as always and be prepared to take notes as I lecture and pause the lecture as you need to. And so this is where we left off last time. We were talking about how World War I was the war to end all wars, and that it was supposed to be so big, so deadly, so expensive that no country ever again would want to fight another war like this one. And obviously we know that's not the case. So it's not called the Great War anymore. We just call it World War I because we had another greater war that follows this, and it encompasses not just Europe again and America, but completely the whole world again. And so that's what brings us to calling World War I instead the Great War, or the war to end all wars. So we talked about this last time. So what's the United States response to the outbreak of fighting? This is 1914 when fighting breaks out. Both on the Western Front, Eastern Front, we have a Southern Front, and then around the world, specifically Africa and Southern Africa, there's going to be battles there that become a part of World War I. There's going to be battles in India that become part of World War I, and even Southeast Asia as well. Japan really not involved in this war, even though they're going to choose the side of the Allies to be allied with. So mainly Southeast Asia. China's going to be involved. So East Asia as well. So really a whole world at war, and you can investigate those areas if you're interested. We're just focusing on sort of the American influence and aspect of it. So, but President Wilson, who's our president at the time, gets elected in 1912, our first Democrat to serve as president since there was another in the 1880s I'm blanking on right now. But so there's a little bit of gap. This is after Teddy Roosevelt, William Howard Taft. Teddy Roosevelt runs for a third term, not as a Republican. He has to create his own party called the Bull Moose Party. And so he splits that Republican vote in half, which guarantees the election of the Democrat, Woodrow Wilson. Very controversial president for some of his views. He was considered by many to be the most racist president in our history, and you can investigate those claims. If you're interested. We won't have much time since we're async and doing things online now, but very interesting character in terms of American history. But he's going to be our president during World War I, and he gets elected again in 1916. So he serves from 1913 till 1921. And it's during that time he continues to tout, like every president since President Monroe touted this Monroe Doctrine, which says, hey, we're going to stay out of your European affairs. You stay out of Western Hemisphere, North America, South America. This is our dominion where we're going to come to police, as Teddy Roosevelt put it. So, but both alliance groups, the Central Powers with Germany and Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, Ottoman Empire, that's the Central Powers. And then the allies of France and England were the two major allies that make up a big group, try to woo the United States, woo us as in bring us to their side. And so the Central Powers hope that 11 million recent immigrants from Germany, from Bavaria, from these areas, Prussia, during this time that had left those countries and come to America would help influence America to side with them in the Central Powers. But most Americans actually were pretty anti-German in the Central Powers from the beginning. And why? Well, Germany on day one, on August 1st, marched through Belgium and killed civilians, including women and children, on their way to get to France, where they eventually stagnated and created the Western Front. in France there. And so Americans saw that and were very reactionary against Germany from the beginning for just marching through Belgium and killing civilians there. And so the US we're going to profit from this opportunity, though, to stay neutral because we get to give and fulfill war orders to make stuff for this war going on in Europe and the rest of the world. And especially, we're going to give loans and supply France and England because they're at war. Like they have industries making things, but us making stuff for them as well and having the resources to do so only aids their cause. So since America turned against Germany pretty much from the beginning, we were slowly aiding our friends, France and England, in that allied group. And slowly we eventually merge into all out war with them against Germany, Austria, Hungary. So, but remember, many immigrants were in America and had ties to the war, so it was very closely watched. And people that were in America were very thankful to be here, that they weren't in war. And so they continue to tell the president and Congress, keep us out of war. It's good. Yeah, but we're tied. We have family, we have ties to the home countries that many Europeans left to come to America from. But we had close ties to Great Britain. Obviously, we were a former colony. And then we appreciated that they weren't going through Belgium and killing civilians at the same time. So here's an example of German propaganda against Germany made here in America, portraying a German soldier having a rifle, and on the bayonet is babes or children, as in Belgium, what the Germans were doing at the outset of World War I. So anti-German propaganda turned many Americans against Germany and against German culture, against German language, against German festivals. There was no such thing as Oktoberfest. It was cracked down on. Many German towns were shut down and were not sort of allowed to proclaim or speak or play German music. That's why Leavenworth was shut down. No, just kidding. Leavenworth wasn't a German town at that time. They didn't become a German town until the 1970s here, so it wasn't around. But so that was going on, sort of the anti-German sort of sentiment in America before we were involved and even during our involvement in World War I. So how does America go from being neutral and staying out of the war, anti-German, to eventually just falling into this war? Well, there's three major events I want you to remember. That's going to be the focus of today's lecture. The first is the sinking of a boat, a ship, a passenger liner. If you think of the Titanic, the Lusitania was like the Titanic, not as extravagant and elegant, and there was never the promise made that it was unsinkable as in the Lusitania, but it's kind of the same kind of ship. So if you've seen the movie Titanic, oh, Leonardo DiCaprio, no, but you probably haven't seen that or think that about DiCaprio, but the Lusitania is much like the Titanic and how it was made. And it just carried passengers from England to the United States to New York City and back and forth from Liverpool to New York City. And that's how people got across the Atlantic Ocean, or any ocean at the time was by ship. We don't have planes flying across yet. Anyways, happens in the 1920s that the first flight happens with Charles Lindbergh. But on May 7th, 1915, this passenger liner was going from New York, had made it all the way almost to England, to Liverpool, England, to where it was going to dock. And while it's off the coast of England, a German U-boat, as in a submarine, they were originally called U-boats because the German word for a submarine was under the sea boat. Like the translation's pretty close to that. So instead, we just said, okay, it's called a U-boat. And then slowly after World War I, we morphed the name to be submarine here. But a U-boat is basically a submarine. And those submarines first were developed by Germany in World War I, became very powerful and effective. And then every country, especially leading into World War II, is going to try to perfect submarines even more. And that's kind of another study. But a German U-boat is going to spot the Lusitania, see it's a passenger liner, and still torpedo and sink this boat. So we have thousands, well, really over 1,200 people are going to die that are passengers on this boat. There are those that survived. The life rafts were mostly full. Again, there's not enough life rafts really at this time to save everyone. So they saved the women and children, became the mantra. But this passenger liner goes down, and on board are 128 American passengers. And so this involves an American response. Now we have Americans being killed in this war conflict that has taken place in Europe. And so this enrages Americans when other Americans are dead. This is always the case, even currently. We always get outraged when Americans die for no good reason at the hands of an enemy or another country. So we want a response. And so in 1915, though, this happens. This is still in year one of World War I being raging around the world, but we stayed neutral. Okay, we stayed out of the war for a couple more years. And what our president and Congress gave as a response to Germany was, you need to knock that off. Quit sinking ships that Americans might be on. Okay, so knock it off. And so we put out this statement, you need to stop it. And in response, Germany says, hey, we are going to continue unrestricted submarine warfare. Okay, we were upset that they targeted and torpedoed a cruise liner with passengers and civilians on it. But Germany's response was, hey, we're at war with Great Britain. We're at war with France. It makes sense that we're going to torpedo and want to kill, our enemy. So they said, we're going to continue to have unrestricted submarine warfare. So just as a notice, you should know if you're crossing the Atlantic, you might be liable to be a target of submarines. And so they put notices in the paper. For instance, this has come from the Imperial German Embassy that's saying, travelers, you're going between New York and Great Britain, hey, you might be targeted and sunk and killed. So just be aware, and so that became a rallying cry. There's Americans that are going to volunteer. Now we're not at war as a country, but we do have volunteers that are going to volunteer their service and say, okay, I'm joining the American military and I'm going to be sent as a detachment, not necessarily as an official, an American delegation, but they're going to join a French detachment or English detachment to go fight in Europe. And so we see posters in America during this time like this that say enlist, join the military to go get these people that are killing American civilians. So here you have a woman and child, are most vulnerable at this time in society, right? The people we got to be protecting, mothers and children, sinking to their death because of the Germans. And here's another piece of anti-German propaganda. You see the hand of Germany coming up below, and there's a couple little ships. I know it's tough to see, but this German hand under the sea, these submarines reaching up and pulling down men, women, children, civilians, and sinking them down to their death is going to be kind of a rallying cry. So that's going to be something ongoing throughout all the 1915, this talk of, should we be in the war? Yes, we need to stop them from killing American civilians, and more are going to perish on cruise ships and stuff that are submarined by Germany, or on cargo ships because we're sending supplies over. So, but those mini outbursts doesn't cause us to go to war. It's going to be the last straw, is number 3 here, which is called the Zimmerman Note. And the Zimmerman Note was sent from the German ambassador in the United States to Mexico. And so what happens, we have this message going from Germany to Mexico. And what is it saying? Well, a British secret agent intercepts this secret message. You see it's in this type script. Even in World War I, we had sort of secret messages, a secret code. You needed your special decoder ring. It's very rudimentary, but still we have coded messages. And so as it becomes intercepted and then deciphered by the British, they're like, oh man, let's give it to the Americans. Why? Well, what did it say? What was Germany saying to Mexico? Was saying, hey, if you join with us in the Central Powers and declare war against Great Britain and France, that's going to get America involved. And then when we squash America and destroy them with your help, because you're on the southern border, you can attack America from the south. We'll attack them from the East Coast and submarine them to smithereens. When we win, we'll give you back those states that you lost when you fought the Mexican-American War, like Texas, and that's a separate war, but New Mexico, Arizona, California, you can have all those states back if you join us. New Mexico, don't want to forget them. You can have those states back if you join us. And once we're victorious in this war, then we'll help you. At this point in 1915, 1916, that really both sides were pretty equal, and the warfare happening in Europe and around the world. And so it was this stalemate. No side looked better than another. So if they had just another country like Mexico join, then maybe that could have tipped Germany's balance to beating Britain and France. And what is going to be the ultimate balance tipping is when America gets this message intercepted by the British that shows that Germany wants Mexico to join. And it utterly like infuriates us. What? We're going to have our southern border, be involved in this war taking place in Europe and elsewhere now. And the Mexicans might fight against us. And so we don't declare war on Mexico, but we're so enraged at Germany that we finally declare war on Germany. And so on August 6th, 1917, that's when Congress votes, and both the House and the Senate have a joint session. And here's the picture of it. And they're reading the votes, and there's enough votes in both houses to give a declaration of war. Woodrow Wilson signs it, and now we are officially entering into World War I, definitely to go get those Germans who were killing Americans on the seas, who sunk the Lusitania with Americans on it, and now who are trying to get Mexico to fight against us. And so those little German devils with their sauerkraut and bratwurst, we're going to go get them and steal them and enjoy them. Okay, so that's how America basically enters. Again, 1917 is a full 3 years after the war has already started. So we don't start the war, we come in and we basically finish it and help tip the scales now for Great Britain and France to have enough soldiers and technology. We basically infuse life into their sides so that they can conquer Germany. Whereas before they were just continually at a stalemate, no side, like they go back and forth. But we tip the side and add so many men and new resources that we help the British and the French defeat the Germans, Austro-Hungarians, and the Ottoman Empire. So as we are going to war, though, we're going to see crop up something that has been in society before, especially during the American Revolution and the War of 1812. And afterwards is anytime we're at war, like our government likes to squash speech against the war. And nowadays in modern times, we don't see this because we know and consider it generally against our constitutional values and rights. But when we've been at war, like whether it's World War I or even World War II, we have elements of this, what's called the Espionage and Sedition Act is going to be passed in World War I. It made sort of obstruction to the war illegal and limited our constitutional rights. And so we're so afraid of spying, espionage, especially from the immigrants that are coming from these countries that we're now at war with, all the Germans here, the Prussians here. We're going to be so fearful of them siding with our enemy, Germany, that we are really going to squash and clamp down their constitutional rights and maybe their opportunity to follow the war. And so there's going to be restrictions on immigration really for the first time in American history, other than what we do, the Chinese and the Chinese Exclusion Act. We're now going to turn to Europe and be like, okay, there's certain Europeans that will receive and others not, specifically Germans and Prussians, Austro-Hungarians, people from the Baltic nations that we're fighting war with. You guys are not welcome anymore. And then German literature, music are going to be targeted and squashed. Records are going to be broken over knees. Lederhosen and German books are going to be destroyed. And you couldn't even play like the symphony music coming from Mozart, famous German, like was put on hold for World War I. That's how extreme it got to sort of support the war cause. And then freedom of speech was reduced during the war. You couldn't openly go out and be like, no war, make love, not war, anything like that. You'd get thrown in jail and fined for that because you're not encouraging the American war cause. A bit different than American society now. So, and then how is America going to pay for this war? Well, modern war is very expensive. Especially when you need all this men that needs all this equipment and you got to transport them and house them and feed them. Modern warfare is very expensive. So how are we going to pay for that? Well, what we're going to do is what's called a Liberty Bond, which is like a savings bond. A bond is really you're investing money now, and then it's going to accrue interest after 5, 10, 20 years. There's a certain maturity a year or rate. And so when it matures, then you get that original investment back plus interest. And so we call those bonds. You can still go and purchase United States savings bonds right now, except literally like you get like a 0.1% return on savings bonds. So because our economy has been so fragile for so long, the federal government, the Federal Reserve has not raised our interest rates, and they're at the lowest rates really in a long time. So that's why maybe your parents are going and getting mortgages, because the rates for interest rates are really low. But it also means that the rates on your savings bonds, your investments, are really low too. And so it's not a great place to invest your money right now. But so you might have your grandmother, though. This is the same thing for me. When it was my birthday, she's like, I'm giving you $20. You're like, yeah, grandma, I'm going to go buy that new Lego set. And then she's like, oh, but it's a $20 savings bond. You're like, oh no, I love you, grandma, but this means I can't use this $20 for another 5, 10, 15 years. And that was my case. And that's how I actually bought my first car. So thanks, grandma. Every year she gave me $20 savings bond, and I just kept saving those up until I turned 16. And then most of them were matured by that point. And I sold them all or used them all to be able to purchase my first car, which was, kind of half given to me by grandma too. And then I so anyways, so it came to fruition later. But so that's how we were asking citizens that had extra income, extra money, want to invest and save money was, okay, hey, we need help to pay for this war. Please invest in these Liberty bonds and these United States savings bonds. You'll get your money back and with interest later, but we need your money. Now, we didn't have an income tax at this time. It's going to come very shortly after this through the 17th Amendment institutes that the United States government can do an income tax. So they had to find creative ways to make money. And this was one way to make money for warfare, was what were called these Liberty bonds. Okay, so it could be redeemed later for the original value plus interest, and more than $20 billion was raised through these Liberty bonds. Okay, and this will be our last slide. So let's see, will be our last slide. Oh, we'll do 2 more. So in the war at home, so many industries are going to switch from making stuff for consumers, which is what we call commercial, to now making stuff for the military, so that the military can win and have everything they need to win. And so American citizens are going to start rationing their food. And so you couldn't get wheat on Wednesdays because those are wheatless Wednesdays. So the idea being that we're saving a portion of our wheat and our crops to send to the soldiers that are fighting abroad so they can be victorious. Or there's gasless days you couldn't go in your Model T and go fill up because we're saving a portion of that for our troops. So, and we really haven't rationed. Things have not been that bad since, we had ration gas in the 1970s. Early 1980s, but it hasn't been since then that we've ever had scarce supplies of any one resource that it had to be rationed to us. So it's only in very dire circumstances or when we're fighting in a big war like World War I or World War II. Also, we're going to pass daylight savings time as a country where we, spring forward, fall back to try to save fuel to increase daylight hours, especially for farmers to keep farming and harvest their crops in fall, right? So we fall back. So we're giving them kind of an extra hour of daylight, an extra hour for businesses to kind of operate. It's kind of a weird kind of thing to think about, but it is predominantly because of farmers being able to have more time to farm. And then recycling and reusing became very popular. So we don't want to keep creating new stuff and needing new materials. Let's just reuse the old stuff that we have. And then our last slide that we'll do today is how do we build an army? Again, we went from really being a really weak military at this time, really weak army, to now we got to have thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of men come and fight in this war. And so what we're going to do, and there's been this before, what we call a draft before, but it's going to reemerge. The last time we did it was the Civil War, had a draft. And so this 50 years prior was the Civil War. Now we're having a draft again to start drafting young men that are capable, so have the physical capability to fight, the mental ability to fight. If you were illiterate, you were ineligible. You couldn't fight because it wasn't seen that you were necessarily smart enough to go fight in the war. And then also, if you had some physical ailment, then you wouldn't be fit for military service. So, but the draft happens in what's called the Selective Service Act in May 1917. And so based on your birthday, it just gets drawn out of a big ball. It's kind of like the reaping and Hunger Games or whatever, where they're drawing a name. In this case, they're drawing birthdays, and anyone with the birthday of like November 11th, yes, you are called to go fight in the war. You have to show up in the next couple weeks at this federal installation and report, and then get your physical examination, and then you go to boot camp and all that good stuff. So the process of a draft doesn't happen anymore, but young men, you still have to register for the draft even today. Women, you're excluded, but there was a talk last year about having women that be forced to register for the Selective Service Act as well, so that you could be drafted. But that was kind of stalled with sort of the political climate in our country. I don't know if Congress will revive that again, but women are also going to serve, so not as frontline or combat soldiers. They don't do so until Afghanistan and Iraq in our country's history. But this becomes the first war, World War I, where women are going to serve in clerical, nursing, and communication roles, as in like bookkeepers or typists on typewriters or sending messages, or as nurses. And so women could serve in the military, but they're going to be in a separate, what's called auxiliary unit or support unit, where they're just helping to fight the war. Okay, and our forces are going to be from America all together in what's called the American Expeditionary Forces, or the AEF, and they are led by this man. His name is General J.J. Pershing. He's one of our most respected generals in American history. The soldiers in World War I loved him and fought for him, responded to him very gallantly. You can see he's older, so after World War I, he just basically retires and is very well regarded and distinguished, and has a distinguished retirement. So the nickname for the American soldiers was Doughboys, because we came late after the fight had already started, right? So we're pretty, what's called green. We didn't have a lot of experience. And then our uniforms, like we came with all this stuff. It wasn't like close fitting. It was kind of puffy. And so it looked like we were doughboys, or, the Pillsbury Doughboy being tickled. Hee hee. And so that's the nickname that the French and English gave us, and kind of stuck from there. The training was cut short, from boot camp. We got to send forces. We got to go respond. The fear was that British and French forces were going to collapse under the Germans. And so, like, here's your training. Okay, now we got to send you. And so that added to the nickname of being doughboys and not having very much experience. So this is where we're going to end today. We'll talk about trench warfare. What were the conditions of fighting in World War I, and what were the weapons used? We'll talk about that in our next lecture, which you'll see after Thanksgiving. So happy Thanksgiving to you and your family. And I hope you have a good Thursday, a good Black Friday, and we'll see you again the following Monday or Tuesday, entering into December. So, all right, thanks for watching. See y'all.